what my podcast is about, Wealth Formula Podcast, which is that I invest in a lot of things, right? In a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be real estate. What my point is simply that you can, if you do a little homework and you're crafty, and you all out there are entrepreneurs, you're all crafty and you're curious and you're interested in learning, treat it like another business. Treat your investments like another business, right? If you look at the paradigm that the wealthy follow, that's what they do, right? They don't make a bunch of money, and the Rockefellers are not investing in mutual funds,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
So why are you?
Right.
That's the point. If you're crafty and you can educate yourself a little bit, you're going to find that you can get much better returns than you're just going to give to, some wealth advisor. People talk about how the market's done so well in the last few decades. And if you look purely on the S&P 500, those numbers are decent, but the reality is that most people have these retirement accounts, and those go into mutual funds. And if you look over the last 3 decades, people have averaged between 3 and 3.5%. And that's barely over inflation.
Right.
So you got to wake up to that, and you got to not just be, and it doesn't require as much time, and it doesn't require as much effort as building your business. And if you're anything like the other entrepreneurs who listen to my show and part of, my community, you're going to really get into it, because you realize, holy cow, there is 2 completely different worlds out there. One is for the poor, the middle class, and the upper middle class suckers who could afford to be invested like the rich. And then there is the way that the ultra wealthy and rich invest. It's completely different.
What's an instrument that people might not normally utilize in building their wealth that you recommend? And how do you utilize it in your portfolio?
Here's a good one right here. So there's a product which, we always use kind of names so people recognize them. But we got Wealth Formula Banking. It's got a lot of names to it, but that's what we call it. And it's a type of whole life insurance product, but it's not really used for insurance purposes. The idea is that you overfund this thing, and you get, ultimately what it results in over the course of a couple years is 2 things. It results in your life insurance becomes free after about 2 years because of the money you're making on it. And then you have this fixed return on investment that you get on that, which is typically about 5 to 6% per year. Now that in itself is not super exciting to me, although 5 to 6% and it grows tax free, that's actually pretty good. But to me, I'm totally greedy about returns. 5-6% does not get me excited. But what here's really interesting is that the way that the wealthy set them up, and the way that in Wealth Formula Banking concept sets it up, that usually by the end of the second year, all the money that you put in becomes cash value. In other words, you can borrow it back out. So you might wonder, why in the world would I borrow money out anyway? I mean, then what's the point of even putting it in, right? Well, you're getting 5-6% on it, compounding interest. You remember what compounding interest is, right? Everybody talks about magic of compounding interest, and you show that crazy graph going up. It just means that every time you make money, it goes back in, and then the next time the yield goes on the initial principal plus whatever you made, and then it creates even more money. But what's interesting about it is you can actually borrow from those accounts. So if you borrow at a simple interest rate. So now let's put that into context. Say you have money growing, say you got $50,000 that's accumulated into this account, and you have, and it's growing at 50%, or it's growing at 5% fixed, or 5% compounding, 5% compounding. Now you borrow it at 5%. So basically what you have is a situation where you are growing your money at a fixed rate, and it's compounding. It's 5% compounding. You're borrowing it maybe at 4% or maybe even 5%. But the difference is that it's at a simple interest rate. So if we look at a line of like a graph, and this is where it gets kind of goofy, but you look at a compounding rate, it takes off. The simple rate just stays nice and straight. So every year, what's happening is that even though you've borrowed money out of one of these accounts, you're still making money. Even though you've taken that money out, you're still making money in that account.
Right, because the compounding interest is greater than the simple interest, right?
Exactly. And then you can take that simple interest product and you can use that as a down payment or whatever investment you have. And now you're literally growing money in two places at the same time with just one capital injection.
That's incredibly interesting because I don't think a lot of people know about that.
Right.
And when people get life insurance, a lot of times they put in whatever the minimum amount is, barely accumulates any cash flow, or it takes a long time to do that, right? And then get disheartened by the fact that they look at it after, a few years of putting money in, or 5 or even 10 years, and there's not a real wealth component to it.
It's because they're not designed for the benefit of the client. Most of these are not. The way that the ones that, middle class, even upper middle class, again, doctors, I got shown these kinds of policies when I just finished my training, and they didn't make any sense to me necessarily. But I remember looking at these, and they were not good investments. The products that we're talking about are the way the rich people do it, right? We're talking about the Romneys and the Rothschilds and stuff. And with these kinds of products, the cash value, I'm going to give you an example of when I started this. At the end of the first year, I had 90% of the cash flow of the first year premium, right? So for those people who understand a little bit what I'm talking about, that's really not what you ordinarily see. Ordinarily, you don't see cash accumulation for a few years.
Absolutely, yeah.
What we're talking about here is that by the end of year 2, you're actually over 100%. And now you're all positive trajectory. Your insurance is for free. It's a pure investment account at this point. And so that's just one example. There's another example, again, using a similar type of insurance product. Again, you'll never see, because these are the types of things that usually you only see if you're ultra wealthy. But it's the Index Universal Life. We call it Velocity Plus to make it easier. But basically, in that situation, what you're doing is it's an options play with the insurance company, and you put in money. It tracks the S&P 500, and they'll let you take 12-13% of the upside. But if the market crashes and corrects by 30%, you don't lose any money. So you only participate in the upside, not in the downside. Now, that in of itself sounds like a pretty good deal for most people, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
It's basically saying, I'll take 12 or 13%. And if the market crashes, well, hey, I didn't make any money that year, but I didn't lose any either, right? But what you can add to that, if you have some level of money, say you've got a six-figure income, is you can add leverage. Now that gets really interesting, right? Because even with 3-to-1 leverage, in other words, the bank is putting money in, right? So you're maybe, instead of doing a $20,000 per year premium, now is $20,000 from you, and then the bank's putting in, 60. If you do that, and why would banks do that? Well, again, I mean, you got the upside, but not the downside. They'll loan you money on that all the time, right? And they'll do it typically, 1% over LIBOR. So the ultra wealthy are taking these, and they're putting massive amounts of leverage on them, right? To the point where sometimes you don't even have to put money in. It's all collateralized. And then what happens is when you put leverage on, the S&P 500, it becomes very, very interesting. Let's just take, for example, 3-to-1 leverage, which anybody who makes, $100,000 per year or more can do.
Right.
You can, if you take 3-to-1 leverage, a 7% return on the S&P 500 in a given year actually will result in a 19 to 20% gain in your portfolio.
It's enormous.
Yeah, it's an enormous difference. And if you get actually 12 or 13% in the market, now you're talking about, high 20s in terms of returns in your account. And then if it crashes the next year, guess what? You didn't lose any money.
Right.
So again, these types of products, these are the ones that the wealthy use. They're not the ones that the poor middle class and upper middle class who should know better but don't.
Right.
use. So
now, how do they find these policies? Because they're not, like you said, not normally presented to them, right? So how is that discovered? How do you find the right guy to help you with that?
I mean, it was really, for me, it was trial and error, and ultimately I found some people who were, wealthy people who were doing these types of things, and they explained to me why they're doing it. Because the thing that you can say, usually with the people who've got a lot of money and they're investing, is usually they're not the ones getting ripped off, right? They're usually not the ones. I mean, new money, young doctors, etc., they're getting ripped off left and right. These guys are really savvy. And so there's webinars on two of both of these products. If you're curious, you can go to wealthformulabanking.com. And I did 2 webinars with the guys who do these products on that. And, I asked them a bunch of questions afterwards, and there's like audience participation, but they're so interesting. Even if you have no intention of doing it, it's probably worth watching just to know that this world is out there, and you might be scratching your head going, well, my insurance guy says you can't do that. Well, I know that because the guys I started out with were like these Northwestern Mutual guys. And when I heard about this, I said, hey, why am I not doing this? And they were like, oh, I never really heard of that. Yeah, complete BS. It's because they don't offer it, and typically these things don't pay as much commission to the brokers. But if the brokers, on the broker side, if they minimize, the commissions to the minimums, and they're dealing only with high net worth clients or people who are making 6 figures, they're doing great, and that's why they do it.
Well, that's the interesting component, and I guess you get a lot of, with these new insurance people, so Northwest Mutual, fairly new brokers, fairly new guys in the marketplace. They only have been taught the basics and don't know anything beyond that. So when they go to advise you, they're in a churn and burn, mode of trying to reach out to as many people, offer the same product or same couple of products over and over again. And it's important that people have to realize they got to do the research, because they've got to understand where they're actually putting their money. In our pre-conversation, I think you really made that clear, where people, they just go, okay, this is what my grandmother did, this is what my grandfather did, this is what my father did, and this is what I do with it. And I see it in my own life, like I talk to my wife about what we want to do with things, and she goes and talks to her father, and he has good things, but that's the formula that they're following, right? So it's hard to get people. How do you get people to start to think differently?
It's helpful if you have a group of entrepreneurs, because they're used to it, right? Because first of all, paradigms are very, very difficult to break. If you just think about how zealous people get about even, not getting too deep into this, but just religion, right? I mean, just look at how religion can make people do really great things, or religion can make people do some very bad things. If you are religious and there are something that, you do that is considered a sin, you feel bad about it, right? I mean, to a certain extent, all belief systems are built and predicated the same way. So with my, I have an accredited investor group, and we, when I'm talking to people, and we're talking about maybe taking down a large acquisition together, and they'll be, they love the idea, right? And then they come back to me and they'll say, yeah, everything makes sense. And I mean, I'm just blown away by this, but wait a second. The problem is, for some reason, I feel kind of like I'm doing something wrong.
Interesting.
Why is that? Well, because it's outside of the whole paradigm. The problem is that paradigms are often wrong. Conventional wisdom is often wrong. I mean, look, the world's not flat. We thought it was flat for a long time, right? In medicine, we remember when you're kids and you look up on the wall and you saw the food pyramid, right? Anybody who's into fitness and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was wrong, but for the longest time, it was conventional wisdom. And guess what? That food pyramid was there because some Harvard scientists got paid off by the sugar industry to downplay the role of fat, or of sugar in cardiac disease. And that resulted in a generation or two of obese people.
Absolutely.
So what you find is not only can conventional wisdom be wrong, but conventional wisdom can be the product of special interests. And that's where Wall Street comes in investing, right? So how is it that we look at, Wall Street and mutual funds and we think it's the right thing to do? It's conservative. What the hell is conservative anyway? Before Wall Street, the wealthiest people in the world were, and they still don't, invest in mutual funds. They own real things.